Another theory of self-disclosure is social comparison theory. According to this theory, we evaluate ourselves based on how we compare with others. And there are a couple of different outcomes that we could potentially have when engaging in social comparison. The first of these is that this comparison can help us to decide whether we are superior or inferior to others in a particular area. And you've probably done this before without even realizing that that's what you were doing. For example, let's say that you're sitting in class and you get back the results from a midterm exam. One of the first things that you might do is turn to your friend and classmate and say, "Hey, how did you do on the exam?" By asking for this comparison, you are inherently trying to decide whether you were superior or inferior to that classmate on that particular exam. And I'm not passing any sort of judgment on this action. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing. This self-disclosure, this comparison, can have positive and negative impacts. Additionally, when we are disclosing information about our beliefs and values, we can determine whether the other person has the same beliefs and values as us or if they are different from us. And this is a really important part of a relationship. Let's say, for example, that you ask a friend how they feel about candidate X. By asking them how they feel, you are trying to gauge whether you are the same as that person or whether you are different. And this can have a really big impact on relationships. When we find things in similarity with one another, that often helps to build and deepen a relationship. Whereas if we find differences, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can lead to the deterioration of a relationship if those differences are deemed important enough. And similarly, we do have to be careful when it comes to social comparison, because especially when it comes to deciding whether we are superior or inferior to others, we have to make sure that the basis for that comparison is a good foundation, right? We have to make sure that when we are making that comparison, that we are comparing similar things. Right? So if we are comparing ourselves, for example, and our body type to the body type of a supermodel, we are going to feel inferior to that other person, right? But that other person has a lot of differences from us. They are probably rich enough that they can afford things like a trainer and a personal chef and things like that, things that we cannot afford. And so we have to be sure when we are doing these social comparisons that we are not comparing apples to oranges, because doing so might actually end up causing a decrease in your self-esteem, and we don't want that to happen, right? But on the other side, social comparison can be a really helpful tool in building our relationships when we find out what those similarities and differences between us and another person are. So there's a lot of pros and cons with social comparison theory, so use this one wisely.